Welcome to Pretty Girl University. Class is starting. Hey, Pretty Girl Club. Welcome to Pretty Girl University. I just want to say F YouTube for not letting me do my bell sound effect, but it's all good. So, this is actually going to be a story time about when I was actually in university. This is just going to be a random fun story time. Well, I kind of feel like it has to do with what we talk about on this channel, but then again, this is also just entertaining. So, side note, this video was inspired by Pretty Worldwide. She actually did a story time about her professor at a university, and it just unlocked all of my memories from like my HBCU times. And so, shout out to Pretty Worldwide. Be sure to subscribe to her channel. She has hilarious thumbnails and she's just really good at storytelling. But I went to an HBCU, and so I will say, as the quote unquote light skinned person, I did kind of like stand out. At the HBCU I went to, the majority of the people there were like obviously dark skinned, unambiguous. There were also lots of like African people, people from other countries who were like very, very unambiguous. And I will say that some of the people they would call out during class, like they may call out your skin tone, or like, how guys might try to fetishize you or whatever. So it's funny because you know how people will say, like, oh, people only pedestalize light skinned women, they don't pedestalize light skinned men. That is a bold faced lie because I went to an HBCU and I remember, so I was in this class. It was kind of like, it was a class that was a part of my major. So I was an upperclassman, and the teacher in this class, she was this really, really old MLS lady. She was so sweet. She was like in her 80s, and she was like very nice to me. And I think part of it is because we had the same phenotype. So I used to go and kind of like talk to her after class and just kind of like say hi to her. And I was so excited to have her as a teacher. So we got along really well. I was like, yes, this is going to be a great class because I've got this lady who can like relate to me and everything. And I remember it was the beginning of the semester, and the first assignment for this class was she wanted all of us to write a 5-page paper, kind of describing our background, and like she wanted us to write this long essay where she could like get to know all of us because the class was focused on writing. It was focused on like psychology as well. I don't remember the exact name of the class, but it was like writing, psychology, and kind of like interpersonal communication. I would say that was kind of the theme of the class. So I was so excited. I was like, yes, I'm gonna like write this super long paper. And I was like, this is gonna be an easy A. And so I remember I went very deep in my essay because I was like, this lady, I know that she will really be able to relate to me, and she's like in her 80s, and she's like a grandma basically. And so I'm going to be very transparent in my paper. I'm just going to like, it's just going to be easy. I'm just going to be honest. And so for those of you who have been following my channel, you guys know that I came from a very strong Christian background. So I'm no longer religious, but I came from that background. And so I literally had like stayed a virgin all the way until marriage when I was like, in my older 20s and stuff. So when I was still in college, I was very much still kind of, even though I wasn't in the church, that was still my background. So I wrote my whole essay about, being a virgin and like my dad and him being in ministry and all that stuff. And I just kind of talked about my entire background and how I didn't want to be another statistic. And like, it was just a very wholesome, very sweet type of essay. And I was like, yes, I know I'm going to get an A because this MLS lady, she's much older than me. She's in her 80s. So she is probably from a very conservative time. And so I remember I turned in my paper and I was like, yes, I'm going to get an A. She's going to like call me out. Because basically the way that she did the assignment was like, whoever does the best is going to be kind of like this competition or something. And so she was basically like, hey, I want you guys to put your best foot forward when it comes to your writing and like your storytelling and stuff. And so I was excited. I was hoping that my professor would see that like she could relate to me and that she would like call out my paper for like being really good. And so then we all came to class on like the second day, and this one guy walks in, and he was like this tall, light-skinned, I guess you could say Creole or something. He was some sort of multi-generationally mixed. I think that he was Creole, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, this guy walked in. He was 28 years old, so I was 23. This guy was 28. And then he just gets up in front of the class and he's like, Hey, my name is Professor Trayvon. I'm going to be taking over this class because the former professor, she is sick, and so she's not going to be able to teach this semester. So I'm taking over this class. I work in the psychology department, and so this class like relates to what I'm doing. And I know you guys all just turned in your papers, and I wanted to make sure that you guys get credit for that. So like I'm going to be reading all of your papers. And then I remember when this guy first walked in, this light skinned young professor, all of the girls in the whole class, like all of the unambiguous girls, they started fangirling. They were like, oh my God, he's so fine. Oh, he's going to be the professor. Ooh, girl, I need to get my lashes done. Like they were going off about this guy, literally obsessing over how this guy looks, how quote unquote fine he is, and basically like almost, I don't want to say competing for his attention, but you know the girls who they are into the whole student professor dynamic, like those types of girls who like sleep with professors and stuff. So these girls were so excited that this guy was going to like be the professor. They were like, "Oh, I've never had a professor like that." And so while all these other girls were in the class like fangirling over this professor, my heart sank because I was like, oh my God. I only wrote my paper talking about sex basically and talking about like being wholesome and like wanting a husband and all that stuff. I was like, I only wrote that so that I could get an A and because the professor was this 80-year-old MLS woman. So I was panicking inside. I was like, oh my God, I do not want a 28-year-old man reading my paper where I'm talking about like celibacy or my sex, my views on sex or things like that. Like, no, I don't want that. So I remember after class, I was like, oh, hey, I need to redo my paper. Like I basically was like, can I get my paper back? Actually, I forgot to include something in there. I tried to come up with a lie. Like I forgot to include something in there. Is there a way that I can retype a certain part of the paper and then like turn it in again by midnight? And he basically was like, no, like I already have the papers, like I'm gonna grade them. And I felt so embarrassed because I was like, oh my God, this guy is going to read my paper. He's going to think that I'm like looking for a Disney princess fairy tale romance. Oh my God. And so I didn't think anything of it. I was like, well, hopefully he's mature and like doesn't say anything about it or doesn't think anything of it. And so I remember the next week I came back to the class. He was passing out the paper and then I got an A on the paper. And he didn't say anything. He didn't say like, "Oh, wow, that was a very like emotionally vulnerable paper." He didn't say anything. So I was like, "Okay, great." Like he's not one of those guys that's going to like try to you know those guys where it's like they see a woman as emotionally vulnerable or she's like very wholesome and then they try to prey upon that woman. So he didn't do that and I was like, "Okay, this is great." So then during class, this guy proceeds to talk about how he is in the ministry, like a Christian, like a pastor type of guy. So, you know how on college campuses they have like little chapels and church organizations, they might have Catholic Mass and stuff like that. So, this guy was a worship leader. So, that's the guy that sings on the stage and stuff. So, he would sing like the opera type of music or whatever. And he was like a worship leader for the Christian part of the university. So, he talked about that during the class. And I was thinking, okay, that's cool. Like, okay, so maybe it wasn't awkward when it came to my paper and everything. Like, that's great. And so I didn't think anything of it. And then I noticed, like, this guy, he would always be looking at me, kind of like staring or whatever. You know how, like, when a guy's checking you out, it's like they're looking you up and down and stuff. So I do remember him doing that. And I remember thinking, this is weird, but maybe he's just, I don't know, being a guy. He doesn't seem like he's creepy or anything. So no big deal. And I didn't think anything of that. And then it came time to do the next paper. And I remember I turned in my paper. Okay, so when you're in college, if you turn in a paper online, you just submit it through like Blackboard or maybe Google Docs or like whatever, like Dropbox or something. You just submit it electronically. So that's what we did. So I remember I submitted my paper electronically. And then I get an email and he's like, oh, I can't wait to read your paper. And then he just starts going on and on about how like I'm such a great writer and how like he really enjoyed my last paper. And I was thinking, this is weird, but maybe he does this to everyone. And so I remember talking to my friends at lunch the next day. I was like, hey, did Professor Trayvon, like when you submitted your paper, did he email you back or like respond? Because usually when you submit something online, You don't get a separate email because you're literally submitting it through a different website or something. So that means he would have had to search for my actual email and like, figure out a way to contact me or something and then directly go into my Gmail, like email me through Gmail, even though I did not submit the paper that way. So I was like, yeah, did he do that to you guys or like respond to you at all? And they were like, no, that's weird. Like he did not respond. Like professors don't respond when you submit something online. And I was like, okay, whatever. I still didn't think anything of it. And literally, so with this class, we had to do papers like every week. And almost every time he would send like a response email, like to my paper specifically. And he would say stuff like, oh, I'm going to save your paper for last. Like I want to make sure I grade all the other papers first and then I'll grade your paper last so that I have extra time to read it. Or like, oh, I'm so excited to read this paper. And it's just started getting to where I was like, okay, like, oh my God, this is embarrassing. He thinks I'm like waiting for a Prince Charming or something and like he wants to be the Prince Charming. And then as time goes on, this guy starts wanting to like call me into his office, like call me in to chat about like random stuff or whatever. Looking back, it's like he was trying to like shoot a shot, but like in a subtle way. And then I even remember one time where me and like a couple of other students were in his office because he wanted to talk to us about some sort of group project or something. And then he just randomly starts singing. Like, those guys that try to entice women with like their singing voice, they try to like seduce you with that. So this guy randomly starts singing. And looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, the same people that would have called me a pick me or a 304 or like all these different names, I was not one of the ones that was fangirling over this guy. The unambiguous women in my class were the ones that were fangirling. So if he would have been doing this to one of them, they probably would have ate that shit up. They would have loved it. But I still ignored, like I wasn't really paying much attention. And then one day I log into Facebook. This guy added me. He found me on we had no mutual friends. This guy found me on Facebook and literally did a friend request. And in college, sometimes they did, this is back when Facebook was like a thing. So in my particular school, they did create Facebook groups sometimes, like for certain classes or like certain assignments, or so all the students could like talk on a certain Facebook wall. So I was thinking, okay, you know what? Maybe he's adding all of the students so that he can create like one of those Facebook groups, just like the other professors used to do. And so I was like, okay, I'll just add him on the Facebook because maybe there's something going on for the class. Why did I get a fucking DM from this guy? He was like, I can't stop thinking about your smile. Like he started going into this long romantic like speech. And I was like, oh my God, this is all because of a fucking paper. This is all because of a paper. But long story short, I ended up like basically rejecting it because I was focused on my social climbing goals at the time. So my goal at that time was to graduate college. I was an upperclassman. I was like a senior in college. So I was 23 years old. I was about to graduate. He was like, a professor and stuff. So I basically rejected it. And looking back, I kind of feel like this guy wanted to clap some cheeks. Like I'm telling you, he was not trying to be wholesome. He was just trying to put this facade on or like trying to act all Christian and godly or whatever because he was hoping that it would make me like enticed because he saw what I wrote on my paper. And everybody around me, the people were like, oh no, he's like being wholesome. But it's like, no, I was about to graduate college and he knows that, like as a professor, he knows that I'm about to graduate college. So like what purpose would there be for me to randomly get in a relationship when I'm going to graduate and like move away basically? But I also feel like, so at this time, that was when I was doing like Instagram modeling or whatever. Like I know it's very cringy. I wasn't doing the slutty Instagram modeling, but I was doing my little Instagram thing. So I felt like, okay, me being on Instagram and posting pics and stuff, that doesn't line up really with like being a pastor or like being a minister and like being this wholesome, holy, like woman of God or whatever. That kind of like contradicts what a lot of men preach in the church. And so I kind of feel like this guy, he probably had like a Madonna whore complex, but he felt like I was the perfect happy medium, like in between, to where it's like, okay, she has the IG baddie look and kind of has that aesthetic or whatever, but then also she was raised in this background where it's like she's very wholesome and whatever. But looking back, another part of the reason why I would have said no either way was because I've noticed a pattern where a lot of guys they don't go for the pick me's or the one in the church. Because what I was thinking was, okay, this guy, he's a pastor and everything, or he's like whatever, worship leader. He's already in the church and stuff. There are plenty of women in the church. There are more women than men in churches. And it's like, why is it that these church dudes, the first place that they will look for a woman is outside of the church? And by the way, I have plenty of other stories about church guys fetishizing me as well. I don't remember. I think I told the story about how another pastor, he asked me to twerk on him before. He was an unambiguous black man and a pastor. He was a young adult pastor. But I've noticed a lot of guys, they want a woman where it's like, oh, I want to take this woman off the streets basically, or I want to take this woman off of social media, off of Instagram. I want to chase after this free bird and I want to hopefully pull her back and mold her into what I want her to be. And I noticed that oftentimes the same guys who talk crap about like women on Instagram or women who are not like wholesome, those same guys will chase after those exact women. And I also felt like in that case, because he was just kind of like an up and coming professor, a lot of professors, even if you do make 100K, you guys already know my views on this, 100K income after taxes, you're taking home around $70,000, which means your monthly paycheck is only around $6,400. And a $6,400 paycheck, that is not enough for like you to live the soft life on. I'm just saying it's not enough for two people to really live like a quote unquote soft life. And I also felt like I would have been at my peak at that time. Like I was 23 years old, leveled up in terms of like my own beauty hobbies and stuff, doing my thing on social media and also about to graduate college. And I've noticed that a lot of guys, they see women doing that and they want to hurry up and snatch that woman off the dating market, or they want to snatch that woman up so that she can help build him. And so she can also like kind of boost his ego or boost him up. And I'm kind of doing a lot of projecting right now. I'm not saying that that's exactly what that guy was trying to do, but that's how I felt at the time, because it's like, okay, if I wouldn't have wrote that paper where I was discussing all of my emotional vulnerabilities, would you still have felt like confident enough to try to make a move? And also for fun, I just Googled that guy. So he's still a professor at a different university. He's not like married or anything. And this really makes me feel like oftentimes, number one, when it came to the unambiguous girls in the class, it's like, I feel like a lot of those women, even though they pretend like it's about the unambiguous black male gaze, I do feel like in a lot of cases, it's the MLS male gaze, not the unambiguous, not just unambiguous guys. I think that those girls fangirling over him so hard and acting like, I don't know, groupies and stuff. Because some girls, they would try to purposely just randomly talk to him about like bullshit after class, like something that had nothing to do with the class. It had nothing to do with an assignment, like just trying to get attention or whatever. So that also had showed me that it wasn't just the unambiguous male gaze that these women were centered around. It was also the MLS male gaze. But something I learned from a young age is that there are a lot of guys who want you to be their Barbara the Builder, regardless of their skin tone, regardless of their race, regardless of their age, doesn't matter how much money they make. There are plenty of wealthy men who are still 50-50 men. In fact, that's how they built their wealth. They will social climb with a 50-50 woman when he makes 50K, and then she will help him build. So now he's at 100K. Then he wants to pick another girl who is smarter than the last girl, and then he wants to use that woman to build him up. Now he's at 200K, and then he can upgrade on that girl again. So I kind of noticed this cycle from the time I was like in college. I could kind of tell that guys would be on the prowl for women who were as pretty as possible while being as young as possible. And I don't want to say as dumb as possible, but like I was kind of brainwashed. So yeah, like kind of as brainwashed as possible, to where it's like you're just so desperate for a guy, or maybe you're so enticed by that guy's physical appearance, or you're enticed by his, his professionalism and stuff, to where you'll just kind of like go with the flow. And I still, to this day, I don't regret not talking to that guy. I don't regret like ignoring all of the responses and stuff. I don't regret like not pursuing that or anything, because I kind of feel like oftentimes if a guy is randomly coming into your life, it does end up sometimes being bad in the end, where it's like, okay, this guy held you back. Now you're not doing your own business as much. Now you're not working on your social media stuff. Now you're not moving to the city you want to move to. Because at that time, I wanted to move to a certain city after I was done with school. So I wasn't planning to just stay there. I'm not the type that's just going to stay in a city just to be around a guy. And there are a lot of women that end up doing that, where they will stay in a certain city because that guy is there. Like, and meanwhile, that was never their dream city, or they never really wanted to live there. But the moral of the story is, ladies, you could be minding your own business and not even realize that somebody in a power position is like watching you. Number two, be careful because these guys can sometimes be odd. Number three, a lot of the women who talk shit about you or they try to come against you, oftentimes those women, they actually want what you have. So you know how you're over here rejecting guys and stuff? There are a lot of women who would kill just to have the attention of that type of guy. And then the final moral of the story is that a lot of guys actually are incels, or maybe they're lonely, or they're really looking for someone, so much so to the point where they're literally scouting out people based on essays they write in a college. And so the male gaze will always be abundant. There's always going to be some guy looking at you. There will always be some guy pursuing you. So there's no need to feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be lonely, or like nobody's going to want me. I don't think I've ever heard of a woman genuinely not being wanted by anyone. I don't think I've ever heard of that. Like, as long as you have two eyes, one nose, and one mouth, and there's nothing like extremely deformed about you, then usually there is some guy out there somewhere that is still going to be checking for you. So that's why when it comes to the decentering men movement, I never really understood when women are like, oh, but I'm going to end up being sad because then no guy is going to look at me or want me. It's like, no, the decentering men movement is because too many guys want you, or they want you too much to the point where it's draining your energy. And so now you're just recentering yourself. But anyway, that is my random rant for the day. That is my story time. What do you ladies think? Have you ever had creepy or like odd professors, or like these Christian, quote unquote, wholesome guys? And in reality, they're leaving the church. They're not even looking at the pick-me's in the church. They want to look to you, and you didn't even know they existed. You were never expecting them to even show up, but then they just pop up, and of course they want to go after you as opposed to going after the pick-me's who are sitting right next to them in the church pews. What do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section, and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.